Welcome back to another episode of the Mets Central podcast. Hope you guys like the new thumbnail graphics. I'm starting to use that on my channels. I'm going to be using it for my Rangers one at some point, but we're going to be talking about the Mets here, not the Rangers, as opening day should have been today. We should be at Citi Field right now, but unfortunately, got rained out, so we will not. We are unfortunately have to wait for tomorrow for that, but still excited to talk about the Mets and just talk about baseball in general until inevitably come the end of April or May. I'm pissed off with this team, but regardless, we're going to talk about it. Before we do, leave a like here on the podcast if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you guys are new, especially if you're a Mets fan. Turn on your notifications so you know when I upload or go live here on the channel. But how are we feeling heading into opening day tomorrow and then also today? I mean, we still get to watch baseball. I think the first game's the Orioles game.
Yeah, Orioles.
Orioles and Angels, which that game probably is going to go the obvious way. But how are we feeling about opening day?
Confident. We go back to start the offseason, it wasn't, the most definitely wasn't the most best start to the offseason. But it ended up nicely, obviously picking up JD Martinez. That was a huge pickup. Obviously, he's not going to be with the team for the first week and a half, as he's going to be starting in Syracuse, to get himself ready for the season. But yeah, I'm interested to see. Obviously, I think the biggest takeaway from spring training was how well the pitching looked, and I don't know if all those guys are exactly going to be carrying that form into the regular season, but if guys like Sevy and Manaya could look at least like half as good as they were in spring training, then I think obviously this team's not going to be competing for a World Series this year, but if they could sneak into a wild card spot anywhere from 85 to 87 wins, I take that right now.
Yeah, which we'll give our record predictions and everything. But yeah, with JD Martinez, we'll mostly talk about him to start off the episode just because that's the newest signing, like you mentioned with them. And he's going to just lighten the lineup. Pause, but he's going to help this lineup out a ton in terms of what they've needed. They need someone to hit cleanup, and he's the perfect guy. I talked about it at nauseum during my review or just reaction to the signing in general. And it's such a smart move with the deferrals as well. It was a no-brainer. We were hoping, obviously, after that, maybe they could sneak Montgomery in with deferrals, but it was a one-year deal. So for $25 million, it was going to be hard to defer that much money. And even if they did defer that much money at some point, having him and JD with deferral money, that's going to hurt you down the road when, maybe you want to spend a little under the luxury tax if they could save money there. But regardless, yeah, I mean, JD Martinez, it sucks that we have to wait like a week or two for him to come up and be here. I thought he'd be ready to go come opening day just because of the fact that he's a hitter. It's not like he's a pitcher who's got to ramp up and face actual MLB caliber hitters again as a pitcher would have to. I thought he'd be ready, but unfortunately not. But still, I mean, this lineup, I would personally construct it right now as Nimmo, Lindor, Alonso, Martinez. I think that's a lock to be the top four. After that, it's kind of anyone's guess. I would go McNeil just to break up the righties with Alonso and Martinez there, then go Alvarez 6. After that, I don't really have a preference. I mean, maybe I'd go Beatty 7th. I don't like Marte in general in this lineup, but probably go with him 8th and then go with Bader 9th. I think Bader's the lock to be 9. Anywhere from 5 to 8 in that lineup, though, I think is kind of a mixed bag on what it's going to be. To start the season, it's probably going to be DJ Stewart, though, in that lineup. I don't like him in the lineup, but you'll probably see McNeil hit cleanup tomorrow, and then DJ Stewart maybe hit 5th or 6th. I don't know, though.
Yeah, my lineup with JD was about the same. There's a couple changes. I mean, obviously, the top of the order goes the same with Nimmo, Lindor, Pete, JD. Then instead of like you said, McNeil hitting 5th, I'd go Alvarez hitting 5th because I just want that triple power threat going back to back to back. McNeil in the 6th hole, Marte 7, Beatty 8, and Bader obviously at the 9th spot.
The only argument I have with having 3 power guys in a row, I feel like you got to break that up a bit too. Just having a guy that could get on base and, protect some of the power guys who might strike out a lot or, hitting the ground outs a lot, especially for a guy like Alvarez who just does not get on base at all. He's got to get that on base percentage up to really take the next step as a whole, because he had like what, a 290 on base percentage last year or something like that. That has to change this year. I'm sorry, but if Alvarez is the guy that we are hoping for, he's got to at least have like a 310 even would make such a big difference for this team. But yeah, I would personally break them up. I wouldn't hate the idea of the three of them hitting in a row if it's working, or if McNeil's really struggling and you got to move him down the lineup. I don't hate that idea. But yeah, and 284 on base for Alvarez, looking at it right now last year. But yeah, I don't know. I think that you can't go wrong either way with those two. But yeah, I think Bader's got to hit ninth for sure. And I think that I don't even like Marte in the lineup at all. I really, if there's a guy that I think is that I'm not hyped about at all this year, it's Marte. Like, I don't know. I can't have like the bottom of the lineup in general is what scares me the most. But that's still not my biggest question mark with the team. My biggest question mark is starting pitching, even though they had a good spring. But the bottom of the lineup, like if Bader, who already doesn't hit well, if he continues to be like that, that's an automatic out there. If Marte is what he was last year, potentially even worse, another automatic out there. And then you got down there Brett Beatty. If he doesn't take a step forward, another automatic out there. And all of a sudden, anytime they go to the bottom of the order, it's going to be like the old Mets days where you had Keon Broxton hitting there and the pitcher down there in the lineup and whoever the hell is catching Kevin Plawecki in the lineup. Like that's your 7, 8, 9 hitters. That's not going to be a recipe for winning. I don't think they're that bad, like in comparison, but still, like you have those automatic outs. As we saw, it potentially makes a difference in this team being a playoff team or not, because in 2019, this team was close, but a lot of that year they did have those automatic outs in the bottom of the lineup.
I mean, like if we're gonna like at any point, talk about X factors for this year, I think, the two biggest X factors going into this year, you could even say three, but in terms of the hitting wise, it's Marte and McNeil, because you go back to 2022, they were two huge, pieces in that offense. Marte with just his ability to get on base, steal a couple bags. He hit for some power. He was just able to, hit for contact as well. And then McNeil, just all around, when he's on his game, he's an all around great contact hitter, and he's able to get on base. And if those two, aren't producing like as we saw last year, then as you said, the bottom of the order, there's just multiple holes where you might put a nice rally together with the first 5 guys up, and then automatically just stops. And I think this is a big year for Marte, because if he doesn't produce, then he's obviously, after next year, he's only gonna have 1 year left on his contract. But I think he's gonna be a candidate where the Mets could just eat his contract for next year, and then with a certain number 22 hitting the market next year, he's fighting for a spot right now, not only
Yeah,
for this year and next year.
yeah, and hopefully he doesn't feel complacent. Like I'm hoping that he also looks at the fact that the Mets weren't afraid to cut dead weight with certain guys before, like James McCann and then Scherzer last year, of course, and all these heavy contracts. And I don't know if the Mets are going to be willing to do it again with Marte, but if Drew Gilbert's tearing it up down there in AAA, you can't hesitate to call him up, because Starling Marte is on a big contract, even if he's struggling. Like, obviously, if he's doing well, that's different. But if he's struggling like he did last year, at that point, you got to just cut bait with the contract, and you just got to accept defeat there. And you got to just move on and then call up Drew Gilbert. And if he thrives, then, that's all of a sudden a big spark plug for this team. And I wouldn't be shocked if it happens by like May or June. I really wouldn't be shocked. And I think the earlier it could happen, the better. And obviously it's up to Drew Gilbert for that to happen, but the earlier the better, because I don't want this team to do what they did last year where, they put themselves behind the 8 ball early and all of a sudden they crawl into the deadline where it's like, all right, there's the possibility of making the postseason, but Is it realistic that we will? Probably not. And then they end up selling off pieces. And again, I don't hate the idea of getting prospects in return for these guys, especially if it's a year that you feel like you can't win. But, if Drew Gilbert comes up and could be an impact bat for this team when Marte's really dragging it down, that changes the game a lot. And then, of course, I think another underrated X factor that you didn't mention still is Brett Beatty, which I think he's going to have a better year. Like, he doesn't need to light the world on fire. He just needs to be passable in this lineup for that to make a difference for this team. And I don't think that, I really don't think he's going to be as bad as he was last year. Maybe I'm overly confident in what happened this spring, and I shouldn't be, because last year he lit up AAA and we saw what happened. But, if he could just even be a 700 OPS guy and give you like a 230 average, something like that, that's at least changing the lineup a bit. Drew Gilbert comes in and makes an impact. All of a sudden, this lineup's looking deep. Not as deep probably as 2022, like you mentioned, because Marte and McNeil were good. But, if they can find some of that juice from these guys, that again could be the difference in this team making the playoffs or not.
I think ideally, in a perfect world, if we're asking for it, I think you have Marte going back to his 2022 year, and then if Drew Gilbert's tearing the cover off the ball in AAA, I think you call him up. You have Nimmo in left, Drew Gilbert in center, Marte in right, and then Bader, who I didn't exactly, love the addition, but I thought it was a decent addition. Now he goes to your bench. He's your fourth outfielder, and he's a really good late defensive replacement and for a late game substitution if you need him. And even like okay, he's not the greatest bat in the world, but we've seen him come through with some big hits. I mean, he had that big postseason a couple years ago with the Yankees, so he's shown that he's capable of doing something like that.
Yeah, and then you do have Tyrone Taylor still in the
Yeah,
mix.
that's another guy. Yeah.
Yeah, who could make a big impact for them in the outfield. I just think that's definitely the biggest question mark is, what's the lineup going to be outside of the top, 5 or 6? Because I truly think that McNeil is going to be, I think he's going to be fine too. I don't know. Maybe I'm just overly confident going into the season, but my bigger worries are guys like Harrison Bader down there in the bottom of the lineup and guys like Marte, Beatty taking a step forward. It's all those guys more than anyone else. But yeah, once JD comes in, that's going to change the dynamic and easily put the lineup over the top. And again, another one who could be the difference in this team making the playoffs or not. I don't think he adds a lot of wins, but I would say you probably are going to need 85 wins to make the playoffs. That could be the difference in being an 83, 84 win team versus being 85 is having JD Martinez in this lineup. So I don't know. And then obviously if they are in a spot at the deadline where they could buy, I'm sure they won't be afraid to add some depth to the lineup, which that would be huge. You add some bats to the bottom of the lineup in particular. That goes a long way. That really does. But we'll see. And in terms of the bats that are on the opening day lineup, I'll list the roster right now. So Pete Alonso, obviously, Beatty, Lindor, McNeil, and then Zach Short made it, which crazy story with him. He found out that he made the roster the same day that he found out his grandma passed away. So condolences to him. And I'm also happy for him that he made the team. He had a very good spring. So not surprised to see him on the roster, but a little surprising that Vientos didn't make it. And then there's Joey Wendell, Harrison Bader, Starling Marte, Brandon Nimmo, DJ Stewart, Tyrone Taylor, Francisco Alvarez, and then Omar Narvaez, which that's another guy that could be an automatic out for this lineup when Alvarez isn't playing. It's going to be a little tough for a guy like Narvaez to – it's going to be hard to win games when a guy like Narvaez is in the lineup, but yeah, 0-4 Narvaez is in the lineup. But I don't know. Now that I'm talking about it more, because I've been confident rolling the whole way through into the season. As I'm saying some of these things, it's kind of making me temper my expectations. Not expectations, because I don't have high expectations, but it's making me temper how I feel about this team back a bit, because there are days where Narvaez is going to go in, and it's going to be ugly. There's going to be days when Joey Wendell has an 0-for-3 day because he's Lindor's getting off his feet for a game. There's going to be those days, but you got to make the most out of what you can with the starting lineup as it is, like the main starters that are going to be there. And then, of course, the pitching, which has to hold down the fort for this team.
Yeah, the pitching. Yeah, pitching is going to be very important. But I mean, just going back, those guys, getting out of your depth pieces. I mean, it depends because when you look at the lineup, some guys on this roster play a lot of games. I mean, I know Pete plays almost all the games. Lindor, same with him. Nimmo, it's going to be down to if he can stay healthy because I mean the last 2 seasons he has stayed healthy, so that's a good sign. Marte, obviously, he wasn't healthy at all last year, so I don't anticipate him playing like all 162. But if we could get like 130 out of him, I'd take that. So yeah, health, and just keeping your starters out on the field as long as possible. That's going to be a big key for this season.
The thing that I will say is I wonder if, you never want to say this because you don't want to wish injuries on players, but I really wonder if throughout the season there's going to be a time an injury comes where it ends up being a blessing in disguise in a way like the New York Rangers had with Blake Wheeler, where maybe Marte does get hurt and that does mean Drew Gilbert comes up and, they didn't want to cut bait with Marte because of the contract, but he does suck. And, you have Drew Gilbert lighting it up in AAA. Maybe something like that happens where there's a blessing in disguise because the AAA depth is very good for this team. Like Iglesias, I like down there. J-Man Toys down there. Feel like I'm forgetting a couple other major league bats that are down there as well. But, it's mostly with the pitching that they have the depth. But, I think there are a couple bats down there in AAA. I could actually look at, the 40-man roster right now.
Like a Vientos down there.
Well, yeah, Vientos too, of course. And then Acuna maybe at some point gets a cup of coffee or gets a couple at bats. So
Jet.
Yeah, Jet Williams, he's starting in AA too. I think Ramirez is starting in AAA or AA this year? AA. I just looked right now. He's starting in AA, which, maybe he gets called up a bit as well. So, they do have a couple guys where it's like, all right, maybe an injury. Again, you don't want to root for it to happen, but maybe it ends up. And yeah, Tracy Thompson down there as well. Maybe there is an injury that ends up being a blessing in disguise for this team, which, again, I don't want it to happen and be that way, but it could be that sort of scenario, which, the pitching, like I said, we'll transition to that. That's where the most depth is with this team because outside the guys that didn't make the roster, you got Jose Budo, who I think is a guy that could be a breakout candidate this year coming up through the pipeline. Shintaro Fujinami had a rough spring. Maybe he finds his game down there in AAA. Reed Garrett, I don't love him, but it's a guy that's pitched major league games. You have Grant Hartwig, pitched major league games. Joey Lucchesi, he's pitched major league games. David Peterson's going to come back. Josh Walker. And, a guy like Tyler McGill, he's not like he's here right now because Sang is hurt. And hopefully the Sang injury is not anything serious, but they have a lot of pitching depth, whether it's with the bullpen and then Sean Reed Foley too. Forgot to mention him, who got put on the IL, the 15-day IL there. And yeah, Bannon's another bat who did well in the spring for the Mets that can maybe get a couple at bats. But with the pitching, I think the bullpen's the biggest strength of this team personally. I really do. You look at how deep it is. Last year, obviously, without Diaz, it forced their hand to make Robertson the closer when he was supposed to be, a guy that comes in, whether it's the 8th inning or a lower part of the lineup. Ottavino then had to go in a higher leverage spot. Drew Smith was put in higher leverage situations. Brooks Raley was put in higher leverage situations, which Brooks Raley already had a good year. Imagine what's going to happen this year when maybe he doesn't face as high of, or he's not in as high of leverage situations. Diekman, very good arm there. Lopez, like what he could be. Tonkins, the other guy that made it. And then Johan Ramirez. This is honestly, maybe I'm crazy. This is the best opening day bullpen I can remember in a very long time. I can't even remember the last time I was this excited about a Mets bullpen being this deep. Maybe 2016 rolling into that year a bit. When they had guys at the back end like Familia and Reed was back there. You had Blevins in the bullpen. Maybe then, but this is the deepest I can remember the Mets building a bullpen in a very long time.
Yeah, it's also another guy, Yuki Matsui mentioned, Nate Lavender. He
Yeah,
looked good
Nate
in the
Lavender. I'm
spring.
excited about him too.
The bullpen's gonna be interesting. Like I mentioned earlier on, just throughout the whole offseason, Stearns. If there's one thing I trust with Stearns, it's his pitching. I think he's obviously proved it in Milwaukee on a cheap budget. He's able to build a good starting rotation, a good bullpen, and listen. When you look at the last couple playoff teams, or at least maybe the surprise playoff teams that have went on deep runs, you look at their bullpen, and their bullpens were just really good. I mean, prime example, you look at the Diamondbacks last year; they had a stacked bullpen.
Yeah, and then you look at a team like the Astros who usually don't spend money. They spent money on Josh Hader, and that's a smart organization. There's a reason they did it, and now they got Abreu, Presley, and Hader in the back end of that bullpen. I wouldn't be surprised if they go the distance again. And a lot of it's because of that, because Josh Hader, you don't have to use him in safe situations, which is crazy because for my money, he's a top 3, top 2 closer in baseball with a guy like Diaz and then, Duran, guys like that up there. But yeah, you have, so that's going to be a strength. This bullpen, which, like you mentioned, the Diamondbacks utilize, the Astros are going to utilize. The Phillies even have a sneaky good bullpen. They make deep runs quite often, and it's going to be the difference. For example, too, of a bad bullpen, you look at the Atlanta Braves last year, where in the postseason, a guy like Brad Hand comes into the game, you want to vomit. You can't have that type of stuff. I'm not a big Drew Smith guy. But if he's arguably the worst pitcher in that bullpen, you're not in a bad spot at all. Drew Smith is still at least a very serviceable MLB pitcher. So if that's your worst relief pitcher, you're doing something right with the bullpen. And like you said, David Stearns, this is what he does.
I mean, prime example of just you talk about a bullpen screwing the team. I mean, you go back to a couple years of our own team, the 2019 Mets. If that team had a bullpen,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
they were only 3 games out of making a playoff spot that year. And if Diaz had that horrible year, even if he was half of what he was in 2022, and they had a couple of other guys, who would have just solidified that back end, they could have made the playoffs, and they could have, made a deep run that year. Because that team, while maybe on paper they weren't the greatest, that team had something special about them. And it was a shame that we didn't get to see him in the playoffs that year, especially when you had DeGrom in his prime.
Especially when the fact that they added a third wild card not too long after. And if there was a third wild card then, that would have put the Mets in the playoffs that year. I at least think. Or was there another team ahead of them too that missed? I can't remember.
The Nationals were ahead of them. The Brewers were ahead of them. Let me check.
Yeah, because that was the wild card matchup, the Nationals and Brewers. I remember that game entirely, which was crazy because the Brewers, if they didn't choke that, Nationals don't go on the win.
The Mets would have made the playoffs that year.
Yeah, the Mets would have been the third wild card team. So yeah, that's another prime example where you get in with this type of roster, you never know what could happen. Which, funny enough, that team won 86 games. That's what I think this team wins is 86. I say 85 or 86 with this team, but yeah, that team had such a bad bullpen because they had Justin Wilson, Seth Lugo, who were the only 2 consistent guys throughout the year, and Wilson got hurt that year, so it was pretty much Seth Lugo carrying the workload of the bullpen. He pitched an obnoxious amount of innings that year, and then the only guy they really had down the stretch that was somewhat decent for them was when they picked up Brad Brock, but that was it. That was their bullpen that year. This bullpen is a lot deeper, and like you guys mentioned in the chat, some of the guys that they could bring up, and then like we were mentioning too, they have the depth. My question's more so going to be with the starting pitching out of anything, because I don't know how to feel about this rotation. I love Severino. I think he's going to be so good for them this year, but health is, of course, the main question there. Sean Manaea, I think, will be a very solid piece for them. Not worried about him. Hauser, he's a stereotypical back end of the rotation guy. He's an upgrade over Carrasco. And if Carrasco is able to squeeze out wins for you, you're going to squeeze out wins with Adrian Hauser. Tyler McGill, I think he's going to be better than people expect. I don't like Jose Quintana personally. I don't even want him pitching opening day. It kind of sucks that he is, in my opinion. But if he could replicate what he did last year, that's going to put the Mets in a spot to win games. And then, of course, Kodai Senga. Hopefully, he doesn't need surgery, because if so, that's probably the death sentence for this team in terms of making the playoffs. Like, if Senga needs surgery and misses the rest of the season, you could pretty much wash away what's going to happen with this year, which sucks because I was really excited for what he was going to be. I expected regression going into the year, but like, I didn't expect it to the point where, he's going to be terrible. But this is what the red flag was with Senga. Like, you were worried about health, and now it's here. Now the health injury or the health concerns are here.
Yeah, I know. I think the Mets either today or yesterday they posted a picture of him at Citi Field throwing, so that's a good
Good
sign.
news.
So hopefully, he keeps ramping up, and then eventually, he'll either be sent down to Binghamton or Syracuse to start, pitching. But yeah, obviously, Sevy, the big thing is his health, because we know he has the stuff. And I know last year was kind of the opposite. He was healthy, and he wasn't good at all last year. But I think that was more of I know it came out that he was tipping his pitches a lot, so hopefully the Mets fixed that, and he looked very good in spring training. Manaea, like you said, is going to be a solid depth guy. He could give you anywhere from anywhere around 3.5 ERA. You take that. McGill, he looked good in spring training, especially with his new spork ball. So let's see how much he utilizes that pitch. And Hauser's your typical, like you said, back the end of the rotation guy. He's your innings eater. And if he could kind of give you a season similar to Carlos Carrasco in 2022, where some starts he looks really good, some starts not, and he gives you around the 4.5 ERA around there, you take that as your fifth starter. And then obviously, you have other guys, Budo, he had a couple outings last year where he looked good. Same with Lucchesi. And then even you go down to the pitching. You go down to the pitching side. The prospect side of things. Christian Scott. He looked very good in spring training.
When he comes up,
if he's doing really good in spring AAA this year, how quickly are the Mets going to bring him up here? Obviously, and then you have guys like Vassell and Tidwell. Obviously, like I said, you don't want to rush those guys, but if clearly they're ready in AAA and they're showing that they can hold their own, then I think you got to bring them up. Especially with Senga coming up, and I know we've kind of heard a lot of things where the Mets could eventually switch up to a 6-man rotation. If now, like, let's say like Senga's back and you bring up Christian Scott, I mean, now you have a 6-man rotation of Senga, Sevy, Manaea, Hauser, McGill, Scott. I mean, that is solid. And I know, obviously, we eventually want to switch. We want to, switch Senga to where he'll be comfortable every 5 days. But if you still got to pitch him every 6 days, then fine. But at least, if a guy like Scott comes up, you have a reliable 6 guy that's going to be able to hold his own.
Yeah, and like that's where I kind of get the vibes of, like, I just feel so weird about this team, because with Christian Scott in particular, that's where you get like flashbacks of 2015 where Noah Syndergaard comes up and all of a sudden, look at this Mets rotation that just became extremely deep, and they took off and ran, and the rest is history with that team, which you would have hoped that it could have been even further than what they did. But regardless, like, they win 90 games when going into the year. That team was not expected to win 90 games. They just weren't. And I think a lot would have to go right for the Mets to do that, to win 90. But I really don't think it's unrealistic with the pitching depth that they have, especially considering what they've had in years prior where, Verlander and Scherzer, when they were out, it was like, well, who's going to fill the void? Well, 2022, I mean, the Mets were able to fill that void when DeGrom and Scherzer missed parts of the season. The Mets did just fine that year, and they ended up winning 101 games that year. So it's so weird to project with baseball because last year too, like, you look at this team on paper, it's like this team's clearly better than last year. Last year they almost won 80 games, so there's no reason to not believe that this team could win north of 83 games this year. But then you also, take into consideration some things that's like, all right, maybe not. I don't know. A lot of it, I think, will also have to do with just how other teams perform because the NL West has a lot of good teams this year,
Yeah.
but they might beat each other up a lot that it might help the Mets out. But then you look at the Central where maybe a team like the Reds, who I think finished second, sneak into a spot because the rest of the teams in that division aren't that good. But for the Mets' sake, they have the Nationals and Marlins, which hopefully they could beat up on those teams. But I don't know. Like, I think that, like you said, with the starting pitching, at least there's depth this year. There's a lot of depth, and that's the main thing. And then Peterson, too, which we didn't even discuss. He still might come back at some point. And who knows? Like, one of these guys might go to the bullpen. And if the bullpen is having struggles, even though we're saying it's a strength, if they do have struggles, maybe a guy goes to the bullpen like McGill and, makes a big impact back there.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look, just going back to the point of how other teams do. I mean, if you just take a look at the divisions right now, I mean, really, who's going to be competing for a playoff spot? I mean, obviously the Nationals and Marlins, they're not going to be competing this year. You go to the Central, obviously the Pirates, probably not the Brewers either. I mean, obviously with them trading away Corbin Burns, Woodruff is not pitching this year. Really, their only big starters Freddie Peralta next year, so their pitching took a major hit. And then you look at the NL West, and it's really the Rockies who won't be, competing for a playoff spot. So I mean, really, with 6 playoff spots, and there's 9 teams that could compete, the Mets only got to beat out 3 other teams. So it's not that bad. They just got to hold their own, and hopefully, like Senga comes back in May, they're, you know, they're at least within a comfortable spot. Maybe a couple of the rookies come up. They make some depth moves at the trade deadline, and then, they're ready to be ready come playoff time.
Yeah, like the only thing that I could think come deadline time that they might have to, splurge on potentially is a definitive like number 2 starter. If they're in a spot to buy, of course, if they go out and say Christian Scott doesn't come up and makes the impact, because I think he could be like, he's such an underrated X factor for this team where if he comes up and looks anything like we saw this spring and he just dominates like Noah Syndergaard-esque in 2015, then that eliminates the need there for a number 2 type starter or stereotypical type number 2 starter. Would be a luxury though then if you go out and get that, and then this rotation's even more deep. But yeah, like I think that going into the deadline, if they are in a spot, a number 2 starter is all they'll need to splurge on outside of getting depth pieces, which hopefully they would actually splurge on like 2022. But yeah, like I really like the depth of this team a lot, like we've been mentioning. So, and then Senga coming back, like you mentioned in May, that's really like he needs to come back in May for this team to make the playoffs too, because I want to actually look at the schedule now that we're talking about it, because I'm pretty sure if memory serves me correctly, the schedule gets a little more difficult once they roll into May, and like April is more of a manageable schedule because obviously they open against the Brewers. That's a team you should beat. Like the Brewers are just simply not what they've been the past few years. The Tigers, they're going to be a sneaky solid team this year, but you should be able to at least like win. You should maybe win that series or go 1-2 there. The Reds, another young and up and coming team. Then they play the Braves, Royals, Pirates. I mean, the Dodgers and Giants aren't easy. Maybe it's not as light as I thought. And then the Cardinals and Cubs. I don't know, but May is a lot more tougher. I can tell you that right now. So they're going to need Senga in May because they play Tampa Bay. I mean, 2 against the Cubs still. Then they play Tampa. St. Louis, they should be able to beat regardless. Atlanta, Philadelphia, Miami, that's a team you should beat. Cleveland, they should beat. And then the Giants, Dodgers, and Diamondbacks. May is going to be a rough month for the Mets with that schedule. That's going to say a lot about this team.
I think if ideally, and obviously I want them to be a bit better than that, but ideally, if you could get through April and May and come out of May at 500, I think you take that. And especially if Sanga's, ready to go either late May or early June, I think you take him being at 500.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to count out how many games are in the entirety of April and May right now, but I agree with that. Like if they could crawl their way, especially through April 500, I mean, ideally you got to hope that they could be better. I hate to do this. I hate to be the guy to look at the schedule and look at what you should pencil in as wins and what you shouldn't, but ideally you win the series here to open. Maybe go what you take 1 out of 2 from the Tigers. You beat the Reds 2 out of 3. The Braves is gonna be rough though.
In Atlanta.
Now that I'm saying it out loud, you got to be able. If they could squeeze a split against the Braves, I'd be very happy with that. I would be extremely happy with that. But who knows? Maybe them playing the Braves in April is a good thing because maybe the Braves aren't in their full swing there, and maybe they could end up taking care of business a bit there. Maybe I'm getting a little overly optimistic with that, but I'm just saying that, maybe playing them early will be a better thing.
I think that might be via a different podcast.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself with that, but I don't know. Like the Braves do start off season slow. That's why I'm saying it. Like the past 2 years, they did start off a little slow out of the gate. That maybe there's a chance they split. They might split because of it. But
I mean, the Royals, they should beat the Royals.
Yeah.
The Pirates, you hope they take them. Then the Dodgers, that's not going to be fun. Giants should be interesting. Cardinals, see what they are this year. Cubs, going to be tough.
That's what I'm saying. Like the Braves start off slow, and usually the Mets are the opposite. They start off especially in April, they start off hot. Then May and June, they start to tweener off. July, towards the middle, they pick it up. August, they're on fire. And then September is a mixed bag. They're either going to collapse and shit the bed, or they're going to be on fire. Like that. I mean, the Mets way.
I mean, remember last year they were 14-7 in April.
Yeah,
that was their record, and then everything the wheels fell off the bus.
Yeah, the June swoon, the typical June swoon. What's the June schedule look like? I'm actually curious now that I mention it. I mean, that's a manageable schedule to start off, and then it gets rough at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, the Diamondbacks is still a little rough, but the Nats, Phillies, Marlins, Padres, you should be able to beat, and then they play the Rangers, Cubs, Yankees, Astros. Yikes.
Oof.
Yeah. I don't know. Senga's gonna have to be back by May, and at latest, mid-May, early June, if the team wants the playoffs.
The start of July rolling into the All-Star, the first half of July that's really favorable for them. They got to win as many games as there. You got a 4-game series against the Nats, 4 against the Pirates, 3 against the Nationals, 3 against the Rockies, and then after the All-Star break, you have a 4-game series against the Marlins.
July looks like the easiest part of their schedule. And then August even too, that second half could be a jackpot schedule for the Mets. They get a lot of the tough teams out early. So listen, I don't like being that guy, but like you were saying, if they could crawl their way, include June into that, if they could claw their way after June being 500 or a little over, I like the odds of this team making the playoffs. I really do, because like you were saying, they play the Nationals, Pirates, Nationals twice, and then the Rockies, Marlins, all those bad teams in July. August even, you play the Angels, you got to beat them. Rockies, got to beat them. The Mariners, that's going to be a little tougher. Oakland, Miami, Baltimore will be tough.
The Oakland ass.
Yeah, the Oakland ass. The Padres should be able to split there. Diamondbacks. Then you play the White Sox, Red Sox, who are probably going to be sold off by then in September. You get the Reds again, probably sold off by then, a couple of pieces there. Blue Jays, maybe you could beat them. Phillies, a little tougher. Of course, you face them twice, but I don't know. The second half schedule is very favorable for the Mets, although they end this season in Milwaukee, which the Mets playing in Milwaukee never goes well. So, that's a little hidden trap series there, but I don't know. Like, if this team, just to hammer home the point, if they could find their way to be 500 or slightly above rolling into July, I like the chances. I
mean,
really
even
do.
you look. I mean, if you want to like compare a team, this team could be very comparable. I mean, maybe not the pitching wise because that team had loaded young pitching, but I mean, like the 2015 Mets going into July, they were 40-38. So if that
That's
team
what
is
I'm
around
saying.
there, and then you go into the All-Star break and you're able to add another big bat, or maybe not another big
Bring
bat
back
in
Juan
this
Uribe.
case, yeah, and Kelly Johnson. No, but then like you said, you add a number two pitcher, and maybe the team could take off from there.
Yeah. Uh, I agree.
Maybe
Like,
maybe Drew Gilbert could be the Michael Conforto call up of that year.
dude, I don't want to feel this way, but like, there are times where I do get 2015 vibes just with this team in general. Like, even going into that year in 2015, though, they didn't on paper have the strongest rotation, and then out of nowhere, here's Noah Syndergaard and Steven Matz to, further bolster. Maybe that's Christian Scott and Jose Budo. And listen, I'm not saying Jose Budo is going to be, Noah Syndergaard like, but if he could be serviceable, all I'm saying. But of course, the lineup, they would need to get a little bit of help there. And I don't know if there's going to be a Yoenis Cespedes type for them to acquire. But regardless, like, there are things to compare with that team. Like, I don't hate the comparison. I really don't. And you're right about this, though. The Nationals
Thank
and
you,
Marlins
Yankees.
play tough against the Mets, but thankfully John Birdie went to the Yankees. But yeah, when the Yankees play the Mets, they're gonna beat them like a drum. And you gotta hammer the John Birdie anytime home run hitter money line right there. But yeah, like, you're not wrong about that, but realistically, like, if you want to have a chance there, in 2015, what'd they do? They slayed the demon a bit there. They actually beat the Nationals. They were able to beat the Marlins that year. You got to be able to take care of business against those teams. You got to, and obviously the Nationals weren't bad then, but I'm just saying, like, that series against the Nationals really changed the entire dynamic of that season.
Yeah, the only unfortunate thing is 90 wins, unless there's some major injuries going on in this division. 90 wins ain't going to be enough to win the division this year.
They're not. Yeah, no, they're not. I'm not saying they're going to win the division or win 90 games for sure. I don't want anyone to get that confused from us. That's not what we're saying, but we're saying that, they could definitely be comfortably an 85, 86 win team by the end of the year if things go right. But again, like I mentioned at the top of the show, there's a lot that could go wrong, like Starling Marte being ass, like Brett Beatty being ass yet again, like Omar Narvaez filling in as a backup catcher being ass, like guys in the rotation being ass. So there's a lot that could go right. There's a lot that could go very wrong, though. And they will shut him down if he needs surgery.
Yeah.
That's the only way they shut him down. And I did want to address this comment because I saw it before. The worst day for me is nobody wanted Belly, Monty, Snell, and Chapman. We could have had them for pennies on the dollar and sat on our hands. And to answer that, the reason they did not do it is because of the fact that because of the luxury tax. And it's not because Cohen's being cheap. It's because realistically, looking at this team, all right, say they add Jordan Montgomery to this team. Is that really the difference in this team, making, like, being a World Series contender, like a legit bona fide World Series contender or not? I would argue no. If you feel differently, then more power to you there. But I don't think that Montgomery is worth going over the luxury tax for when he does not guarantee them, or like not necessarily guarantee because nothing's guaranteed with winning a World Series, but doesn't make you, it doesn't make you better than the Phillies. It doesn't make you better than the Braves. So realistically, I don't think it was worth it. If they did not have the dead contracts right now of Scherzer and Verlander, they 1,000% would have gave Jordan Montgomery that contract that the Diamondbacks did. Like I would put good money on that.
I think it was the fact that, like you said, luxury tax, and I'm not sure about Monty, but I know that Bellinger, Snell, and Chapman all had compensatory picks attached to them, so I don't think they wanted to give up those draft picks either.
That too, which is another fair reason. And I get the argument that's not an excuse because of Yamamoto and Correa, but to the Correa argument, that was last year when the Mets were willing to just blow by the luxury tax because they thought they were a legit World Series threat coming off an 101 win year. And then with Yamamoto, that's a guy that would have been here not just for next year, but the foreseeable future as like a bona fide ace that they're projecting, which obviously things are looking rough with Yamamoto right now, but during free agency, the whole talk is he's going to be a legitimate perennial Cy Young candidate year in and year out. Jordan Montgomery for 1 year, like he's not winning you Cy Young. You're not winning a World Series with Jordan Montgomery. Blake Snell, I know he has 2 Cy Youngs, but he's shaking. He's on the older side. Like they want to go younger as well, which you got to respect. You have to respect that they want to go younger with this team.
And even if you want, like, you could get Monty next year. I mean, he only signed a 1-year deal. I know it's an option if he doesn't pitch, if he doesn't get more than 10 starts. But I mean, barring any major injuries, Montgomery should make more than 10 starts. So most likely he's gonna opt out. And then even like next year, you go into free agency, you could pick up Corbin Burns and Montgomery if you really want to.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's another thing. Jordan Montgomery could be here next season, and I don't blame them for wanting to save their ammo for next offseason. The free agent class next year is far superior. Like none of the guys this year were worth going over the luxury tax for outside of Yamamoto, which is what the Mets felt, which is why they gave an offer, and it didn't work out. He didn't come here. But next year, Max Fried's a free agent on the pitching market. I forgot who else. There was like another really good.
Bieber's a free agent.
I'm not a believer, but I mean, still, like, that's still better than like most of the pitchers on the market here. I'll actually look at the free agent class next year, but obviously Juan Soto's the big name where they want to save ammo for a guy like that in the offseason. And I don't think Garrett Cole will opt out, but say Garrett Cole does opt out, he might. If the Yankees underachieve again. No, I still don't think he will. It really depends on the injury of that. Although, what is it, a player or I don't know. There was some sort of thing that people were saying that maybe like it could void the contract. I don't know.
I forgot what it was.
Yeah, there was something about the contract that's weird, but
we could bring back Max Scherzer next year.
They could bring back Max Scherzer.
No, that ain't happening.
But no, like looking at the pitching market, Corbin Burns, that was the top guy.
Yeah,
I don't know how I forgot. Corbin Burns, like, would you rather them go over the luxury tax to get Corbin Burns or go get Blake Snell? My answer is easily get
Burns.
If they can find a way to get Burns and Fried, I'll take that over having Blake Snell. So, and yeah, Blake Snell had a qualifying offer attached to him as well. They weren't going to do it.
And I think another big thing is, especially for next offseason, why most likely they're going to go all big next year is look how much dead money's coming off the books next year. Scherzer's coming off the books. Verlander, if I forgot what the innings requirement was, but there's a certain innings requirement where if he goes under, his contract next year gets voided. And I'm not hoping for injury, but it'd be the best.
He already is hurt, so
yeah, it'd be the best case scenario if he doesn't reach that innings limit. I mean, then you have McCann's money coming off the books.
Aren't they still paying Cano a bit too? Even like
I think they stopped paying him last year. I'm not sure. I think it might have been last year or this year's the last year.
I'll actually look right now. Yeah, no, they're not paying Cano. They're still paying Bobby Bonilla, obviously. They're like Scherzer and Verlander combined. It's $55 million combined. And then James McCann right there, another $8 million. Now they have dead money with Phil Bickford too. They also have dead money with Adam Ottavino, even though he's on the team, but they have that for this year and next year. But
I
yeah,
mean,
they have.
so what? That's like $64 million in dead weight just combined between Scherzer, Verlander, and McCann. I mean, that's two aces right there.
Yeah, and Scherzer, it says here, that contract alone that they're eating is taking up 10% of the payroll.
Yeah.
That's huge. Verlander's taking 8% of the payroll up. McCann's taking almost 3% of the payroll up. That's so much dead weight. Like,
And
yeah.
let's not forget that money's also Juan Soto's salary for next year. So
I mean, if we're gonna talk about this, like, I don't know. For me personally, I don't want to. I don't know how to go about addressing with Bauer and Clevenger. I mean, Clevenger already pitched despite the allegations against him. I at least think he did pitch after that. So I don't know if there's many question marks there, but with Clevenger, he'd have to take a very team friendly deal if the Mets were to go get him, which I wouldn't mind him for the rotation, depending on the price. And then Bauer, too, there's more uncertainty there because he has not pitched. And I don't know really what's going on with his entire situation. There's more things with Bauer off the field than Clevenger that are being discussed, like how there was clubhouse issues with Bauer, like outside of obviously what he was accused of. There was like clubhouse things that were up in the air with them and certain other things, but yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't think the Mets are going to do it though. Regardless, no matter what, the Mets are not going to get Bauer. If they really wanted him, they would have done it at this point because Bauer's been very vocal on social media that he would take a deal for league minimum. So if the Mets didn't give it to him by now, I don't see why they'd even go that route with him, especially because of what happened, of course, with when they were going after him originally, and then just what's happened with this organization nonstop with, certain general managers and managers, things they did. So I don't know if they want the cloud over them of Trevor Bauer personally.
yeah, like I've mentioned before, I would have personally for me, I would have taken the risk on Bauer just because it's a league minimum 1 year deal, and like I brought up the point many times where look, if the Mets are not a good team and Bauer's on and he's pitching well, he's on a league minimum, you could easily flip him at the deadline to get a lot of good assets. But I understand with all the allegation, well not the but all the the circus media that's gone on the Mets the last couple years. I understand why they didn't take the risk.
Yeah, I just never thought that they would do it either way, so I don't know. But we'll move on and we'll get into a bit of predictions this year for the season. So the first prediction I want, who is going to be second? Because we know who's going to be first on the Mets and home runs. Who do you think will be second on the Mets and home runs?
Ooh, it's really down between two guys for me.
Okay.
I'll go No, because he's missing the first. No, I'll go JD just because he's more proven. And I mean, obviously, we've seen with Alvarez, especially last year, he does have his up and down moments where he'll go on a tear for a couple weeks, then he'll be quiet for a couple weeks. So I think since JD's the more experienced, the more consistent guy, I think he'll edge out Alvarez for the second spot in home runs.
That's a fair pick. I'm so torn with this one. Honestly, there's a couple. Who is your second guy?
Alvarez.
Alvarez. See, for me, it's either I have like four guys. I would say it's either going to be JD, Alvarez, Nimmo, or Lindor.
Lindor, yeah.
No, I'll go with the hot take. I'll say Brandon Nimmo. I'll say Brandon Nimmo second in home runs on the team. That's a very hot take, I know, but he started the show power last year. He started the show. I think I wouldn't rule it out. I really wouldn't rule the possibility out. But I also do want to do the ones that the Mets'd podcast tweeted out with their list of predictions to make. So we'll run down that. Shout out to them for that. So not going to take credit there. Record prediction. I tweeted all of mine out, so I'll let you go too. What is your record prediction? I'll start off since I've said it all episode. 86 and 76 for me.
I'm anywhere between 85 to 87 wins. I'll take the middle like you. I'll go 86 wins.
86. Who will be the team MVP in your eyes?
Pete.
Yeah, I think Pete's going to have a ridiculous year in a contract year for sure. Lindor is a fair pick there. Least valuable player.
I know you put Narvaez, right?
Yeah, I put Narvaez.
Probably the same thing, Narvaez.
Best pitcher. I put Edwin Diaz. Which this is still tough because you also have to think like what constitutes as the best pitcher?
I guess the most impact probably.
Yeah, probably that.
I'll give two. I'll go starter and relievers. Obviously relievers Diaz, and starter. I'm gonna ride the wave, Sevy.
Yeah, I've been on the Sevy train. I'll go with Severino for starter there. Breakout player. I'm delusional and I'm going with Brett Beatty, but it's hard to pick because it's hard to there's not a lot of breakout candidates, if you will. Like to me, breaking out my definition of that is someone that's kind of been, middling with the major league roster and AAA roster and then ends up taking a big step forward. The only other guy I can maybe say is Jose Budo for breakout.
Listen, obviously, we're rocking. I don't know if I can turn around, but we're rocking the Beatty jersey. Hopefully, he can break out. Obviously, it sucks that Mauricio went down because if Mauricio was here, I'd probably say him.
Yeah,
but I'll deviate. I won't go Beatty like you picked. You know what? If he's shown flashes over the years, when he came up, he looked good, and obviously with this new pitch, the Spork. Let's go Tyler McGill.
I like that pick, though. Comeback player of the year, I went with Severino. I mean, if I'm saying he's going to be the best starter, the guy's been hurt. He's going to be the comeback player for this team.
Sevilla.
The home run leader, we already addressed that for who's going to be second, though, as well. All-stars. I only picked 3 because it's really hard for more to make it. I wanted to put Nimmo in, but I went with Diaz, Alonso, and Alvarez to be safe because I feel like there's not a lot of catchers really that are in the conversation in the National League. So I think Alvarez will find his way in because of that. Alonso, because he's going to have a monster year. And then Diaz, who's probably the best closer in baseball.
Pete for sure. He'll be there. Diaz probably. It's tough because you could pick a lot of guys here. Obviously Lindor. I'll go Lindor.
I like that pick. Gets traded. I went boring. I picked Mark Vientos. I think that at this point they're just gonna move on. And also because I have them making the playoffs where if they're in a position to buy, I think Mark Vientos is the guy that's in a package deal for whoever it may be.
Probably that's the most likely because I think like we've been saying, if they're in it come the trade deadline, I don't think they'll go too crazy and splurge on like a major guy. So I don't think they'll be giving up the big prospects like Acuna, Gilbert, Scott. Those guys won't be on the table, but definitely for like some depth pieces, if Vientos is available, then probably it's gonna be Vientos.
Yeah, I agree with that, but that's really going to be it for us. I don't think there's much to talk about, and first pitch is coming for a couple of these games here, so gonna go watch now a couple of baseball games. And yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't. We're going to be doing Mets content here all season long. Try to make the podcast more consistent than it's been, especially last year where it was really inconsistent because the team they were dog shit. They were dog shit. So it was hard to even cover the team without being pissed off and just bored out of our minds. But yeah, we'll make sure to cover them even if they do end up being ass, because it's going to be more of a fun year since this is like the feel it out year regardless. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But thank you guys so much if you did tune in. Leave a like if you haven't. Subscribe. Turn on your notifications as well. And we will see you guys in the next one, probably tomorrow for a post-game recap. Maybe a live City Field post-game recap. We might. But yeah, we'll see you guys in the next one. Let's go, Mets.